Hey, my friends, how are we today? So, I've got Andy Moran on the podcast today, and he is a financial planner that helps people in tech pay less in taxes and also take career breaks. And we have a lot of commonalities. So, I'm super stoked about this podcast to talk about all things. We've both taken time off and all the different things in terms of money and how to think about money differently, use your money differently. And so, I'm so grateful that you're here, Andy. And yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As soon as I remember I think we met at a mixer, and I gave my story and you gave your story, and it was like, oh man, there's a lot of resonance here. I'm going to have to follow up. And then I feel like I encountered you somewhere else again, and I was like, okay, I really have to get. I already had it on my to do list, my checklist. Okay, reach out to Erin, like listen to her podcast, and then I ran into you again. I think other context, and I was like, okay, and
Yeah.
then as I, listened to your podcast and had conversations with you, it was very clear. Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Um, you know, I think it's getting more and you can talk about this. I think it's getting more and more um accepted doesn't even feel like the correct word, but like uh more what is the word? Whatever normal is, air quote normal, right? Of like
Exactly.
this idea of like we can actually take time off of work and we can do some of the things that we love. Like, on a previous podcast, I called it like a mini retirement, right? Like we have built this like societal conditioning into like you work, you save your money, you save for retirement, and then you get to go and enjoy your life. So, do you want to share with the listeners like kind of what has been your story of kind of doing the checklist, following all the air quotes rules, and then now how you have kind of almost done like a 180.
For sure. Yeah, and I feel there's definitely like aspects of generational perspectives on it. I think for sure, like to a certain degree, right? Like you'd say, like maybe the baby boomer generation maybe grew up in the era of getting an education, going to school was going to provide you with the white picket fence and the American dream. You just work hard, maybe collect a pension, right? But I think, us growing up, the idea of like a 9 to 5 to 65 and that you're going to be collecting this pension, it always felt a bit antiquated for me, even kind of from a young age. But I still internalized a lot of the messages you receive because like you're young and you just take them in and you don't always parse them critically or you have to go through the process really, at least in my experience, of unlearning, like
Yeah.
actively unlearning the things that were put into your head for usually well-intentioned reasons, right? So I was kind of brought up in Silicon Valley where I felt like this kind of message I could felt like there was aspects of not truth to it. But my I grew up in a very Midwestern household, so I was very focused on kind of frugality, hard work, discipline, kind of those values. Very like debt phobic and very much like work hard, grind, and everything will be okay. So I kind of was following that checklist, right? I threw myself into school, got straight A's, crushed all the standardized tests because I thought that's what you need to do. You just got to get
Mm,
really good at test taking, right? And then of course you realize like life is nothing like the tests, right? See, threw myself into college, did pretty well with that. Then kind of professionally, kind of threw myself into that as well. I found a nice enough job. It was at a startup in Silicon Valley. I had pretty flexible hours, which was honestly a lot of what kept me there because I did
mm,
really get to value that flexibility. We'd kind of come into the office Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and
mm.
a lot of times, like people would come in, after the morning rush hour traffic and like leave before the evening rush hour traffic. It was pretty nice in a lot of respects. Um, and kind of early on, there's all this talk of we're going to IPO, and it was very exciting because growing up in Silicon Valley, you really see the power that there is in like companies going public to like kind of create transformational wealth in people's lives. Like I
Mm.
definitely kind of grew up seeing that in my own family and kind of seeing it in the valley more broadly. But kind of as I was at this firm, and just kind of over the course of years, the talk of we're going to IPO in 2 to 3 years, that started like shifting further and further out. It started becoming more of a nebulous and distant thing. And at a certain point, I kind of found myself, and kind of within that time frame, I was kind of continued to take on new positions, and I kept learning new things, so climbing up the ladder. But at a certain point, I found myself kind of being like a firefighter in chief, I kind of
Mm,
worked on so many different areas of the product that kind of whenever there was like a big emergency issue in production, they'd be like, "Hey, Andy, you can go fix it," right? And part of me, like, I contributed to my role in this, right? Like, I threw
yeah.
myself into work because that was the toolkit I had. You just work hard, and I'd gone through some deprogramming of my own, so like it wasn't just that all my existence was around work. Like I also knew it was important to have other things in life, and I was kind of doing that, but kind of between where I was at in my job with my profession and kind of between some crazy stuff in my personal life around the same time, around 2018, 2019, definitely kind of found myself seriously burnt out, depressed, stressed, feeling very stuck in my job. And so it's kind of at that point I really hatched a plan to take my job remote, travel the country for a year while saving money, reset some of my habits, and then kind of take a year off with those savings.
Mhm.
Now, things didn't go exactly to plan. I moved out of my apartment at the end of February 2020. I took my job remote March 1st, 2020. I was prepping my van to go to an event in Austin early April at my parents' house, like as like mid March when COVID lockdowns come in, right?
Yep.
So things didn't exactly go to plan, but I was able to still kind of execute on like the core drivers of that, and it really changed my life. It hasn't been the same since. So I was able to do quite a bit of traveling in 2020. I quit my job in that fall, and 4 years later, well, 3.5. I'm kind
Yeah.
of still living the nomadic life. Um, Now I'm kind of transitioned from tech into becoming a financial planner, and I'm 1 year into kind of running my own financial advisory firm. Kind of with those core missions of really helping people take career breaks on their own, pay less in taxes.
Yeah. It's it I obviously, financial planning has been my background and been around financial planners and also working with financial planners and trying to, as I'm building this cohort for people to come in and learn. And you definitely, because I think you have had that experience, you definitely have a different view from a financial planning view. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that because I think that a lot of us go to our financial planner, and this is what I've heard from a lot of entrepreneurs too, right? It's like, I don't want to do the normal, like, in a box thing that, financial planners have been taught to do, right? Like, what are some other ways that we can invest our money or just different ideas and things of that sort to use our money versus the stereotypical, right? Like, these are the ways that you should invest, or this is how you need to save. And I think a lot of us are now like wising up, for lack of a better word, of like, I want to use my money in ways that feel really good to me versus this, okay, we have to save and like accumulate and put all of our eggs, for this end goal at some point, when we're actually going to get to enjoy life. So I would love it if you would share just, kind of your take on financial planning and how being off of work has shaped that, and just, yeah, different ideas and thoughts that you have around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mean, I definitely had. I would say I had a fairly negative view of the profession coming into it for sure. Like I definitely was like, I'm here as this outsider that's going to disrupt it. But I think my stereotype of a financial advisor was maybe like a white dude, maybe like in his 60s or 50s, wearing a suit, who's going to try to tell you got to diversify and put you in like a 60-40 portfolio. And that's kind
Yeah,
of that was the image. And to some degree, there's some truth to that image,
there's
right?
still some of
It
that.
is a
Yeah.
very older white man dominated profession. Um, and I guess I'm somewhat. I mean, I'm not as maybe I'm a little younger, but I guess I still present as like a white man to people and such. But such as it may be, um, yeah. I mean, I definitely like growing up. I probably grew up with a lot of skepticism of advisors because I feel like engineers in general.
Mm,
My dad was an engineer. His dad was an engineer. I started on the engineering path. There's a lot of skepticism of. I think a lot of engineers feel like this sense of like I can do this thing, which is honestly there is like that is pretty awesome that engineers can go out and kind of design and create and build these things in the real world. Like it honestly is really cool. But I think it can also be easy to dismiss things that you have maybe less understanding or less
mhm.
skill or aptitude in. Not to say engineers aren't. Usually, I think a lot of engineers, may also be good at managing their money sometimes. Um, so I grew up with kind of yeah, interesting mixed messages around money. Because like on the one hand, I feel like I learned so much about the fear of going into debt, like not going into
Mm,
debt, and honestly, to a certain degree, like there is like I don't like being in debt. That is still definitely a thing where I probably lean maybe an extreme of that like continuum. But um I did also kind of learn, the Silicon Valley. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I kind of got to see like the potential upside and making kind of more risky decisions like running a business. So it was an interesting mixed message of like very risk averse, very fearful in a lot of ways, honestly, but
yeah,
also like go and take that big swing, take these big risks, kind of different messages. And I think in tech, that there's a common it's definitely a common perspective of you're kind of going for those big home runs, right? You're looking to start at a small startup, have it reach some large enterprise value and get a large exit. Or I guess the other path, if you work at like a big tech company, you're working at Amazon, Facebook, Google, you're just it's less about like the large IPO payoff and more just you're getting a lot of equity compensation as part of your package. You're getting a lot of restricted stock units, which it's basically like a bonus, but in the form of stock. Um, so, anyways, I forgot where I
yeah.
was rambling. I feel like I've
Well,
diverted a little bit, but in terms of alternatives, so I think one of the big things too is also like just getting clear on what it is you want out of life. Because if you just think in terms of money, I think money makes like a poor makes a it's a great servant and it can be a terrible master. Like
yeah,
if your only goal, like I feel like there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley and not just Silicon Valley,
yeah. It's
but
everywhere. Yeah,
it's everywhere, right? It's easy to like build, this. I'll be happy when I have
yep,
5 million, when I have 10 million, whatever the number is, and like part of me, I got really into the financial independence, retire early community, kind of because
mm-hmm.
like I'm like, oh, I can save up to a certain amount of money, then I could live off
Yep,
my investments. Like, there's a lot I still like about some of the aspects of that community, but I also think that it can almost like create new false idols of like I got to reach this
yeah,
FI number. And I knew
yep.
for me, like I kind of felt like anchored to, even though my number wasn't necessarily like as high as some people's, because it could be a moving target. Like I've talked to people now where they have like $11 million and they're like they're like
It's not enough
debating
for
and
them.
stressing out about whether it's going to be enough, and it's like your kids are gonna not want to be with you soon. Like if you want to spend time with your kids and have those memories, you need to do something about it now.
Yeah,
And it's easy to just go on autopilot and not reflect on those things, but I think for a lot of people we just kind of get in our day-to-day grind or day-to-day flow, and we kind of lose sight of what we're really trying to get out of life sometimes.
yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes it takes like these really big crises to get and I hope more people don't, I hope I
yeah.
can, we can meet some of these people before they get to the point that I got to, or perhaps you got to as well.
Yep.
But such as it may be.
Yeah, I wanna go back to debt because a lot of people have, I remember, oh gosh, I don't know if it was on Forbes or if it was on tech. I think it was on Forbes magazine when Michael Dell was on there. And this was I don't know how many, like this might have been a couple years ago, but he was talking about how he was like, everyone was talking about going to the moon and doing all of these things. He was like, I know that the way that things are changing, that I don't know if you read that article or not, but like the way things are changing, that cloud storage is going to be a thing. And so and don't quote me on this exact number, but like maybe he knew that was going to be, he was going to invest in that. And so he did like 75 million, right, in debt for this, but then what was his payoff, right? Like it was like in the billions, right? And so going back to debt, like I think we've been taught with like the Dave Ramseys or the Susie Ormans or like all of these, like we idolize these mentors of like, oh, they say no debt, no debt, no debt, right? Versus okay, well, what are you using the debt for? And like you were saying with, Silicon Valley, like, are you going to, for lack of a better word, make good on the debt, right? Like, are you using it to propel you and not from a place of like, um because I think it could be a slippery slope too, right? Like are you,
Yes.
because it is all energy, right? Like from an energetic standpoint, you are withdrawing before you have energetically created that. But I think that there isn't a one size fits all with debt. And I think that we as a society have been taught like there kind of is, right? And then there's so much shame around debt, right? Like, why do we view like a mortgage as okay debt, but we don't view, like putting money on a credit card or a business loan or whatever to, to create something as that's different. You know what I mean? It's just these ideas that we have around debt. And so I would encourage each of you, like, like Andy's saying, like, what do you want your life to look like? And starting to make decisions for yourself versus like so and so said, and then this is what I should do. You also talked about, people like 10, 11 million, like it's like this goalpost, right? Like we have been taught like this number is going to give you the feeling. And that is never, at least it's been my case and people that I've, worked with and helped and talked to, right? Like that number is never going to give you the feeling that you're chasing after. And also it's almost like you get to that point and then you realize it doesn't. And then you're like, okay, well, I need to keep doing more and more and more, right? Versus doing work you love now, like living the life that you love now. And that isn't a just straight away of like, spend all the money now, it's also like, where's the balance and like enjoying your life, doing work that you love and that like you want to get up in the morning time for, versus this like I got to hustle and grind and save the money so then I can get to enjoy my life at some point, in the future. And I think a lot of us have been, I don't want to say sold that story, but
Yeah, yeah.
like it's almost like, I was on the fire bandwagon for a long time too. And I was like, I'm literally like almost killing myself to get to this point.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel good in my body to like deprive myself of everything right now to that in, 5 more years, I can actually like I haven't been on many diets, but I could imagine that's what it feels like, right? Like you're just denying every pleasure and enjoyment of the present day for this fantasy in the future?
No, absolutely. And I think to your point too, there's just it's so easy to, take these rules of thumb and turn them
Yeah.
into these absolutes that govern our life in ways that's not always healthy. Like these principles, they may be sound, generally speaking, sometimes. I mean, sometimes not. But there's definitely advice that can be generally useful, generally practical, but it can still definitely not be what's ideal for you. And sometimes there's definitely gray area as well. Like, as a financial planner, I have to put on my like fiduciary hat of like, what does the prudent person say? But sometimes in life, like, I mean, I know like other financial planners that to start their businesses, they withdrew from their 401k, or they,
Mhm.
took on credit card debt, while they're
Mhm.
building it. Like these stories exist. To your point about, kind of businesses as well in debt, when you mentioned the Dell story, like I feel like in America, there's really like I think of it as like there's three like main paths to kind of wealth in the
Yeah.
American system, as I view it at least. That really, you either have to own like financial assets of some sort, or a business, like some kind of
Yep.
something that's generating cash
Asset.
flow, or some
Yep.
kind of real estate, owning assets. But like those are the kind of three main forms that the tax code favors, that are more conducive to kind of generating those outcomes. Um, and it's an interesting because like business ownership is really risky. It's kind of like,
Yep.
instead of, let's say, index funds, you could say like investing in index funds is, it's less risky than maybe owning a business. I mean, real estate, you could slice it different ways depending on what you're like. If you're just buying the house because you want to live there, and it's like I generally approach decisions about, I mean, there's also like I generally approach like home ownership decisions from the standpoint of like, the lifestyle that you want to live. Like, do you
Yeah.
plan to stay there for a while? Is this, I feel like home should be because you really want to have that lifestyle, not because it's going to appreciate in value and I'm going to sell it. I think people have
Yep.
gotten used to that being the case.
Yep.
Um, that doesn't, it's not always guaranteed to be the case. And I would say the
Mhm.
same thing with index funds. So like I'm definitely a big, advocate for index funds, having a diversified portfolio of like investable assets. um, but stock markets have their ebbs and cycles too. It's not a straight line up. Like you look at a stock chart, you take the world index or whatever, there's a lot of ups and downs along the
Mhm.
way. And depending on when you invest in and when you exit, especially if you're trying to, achieve like a short come outcome, I mean, that's probably why, if you're going for a short-term outcome, index funds aren't necessarily like the investment you should do. It kind of depends on what your goal is. So I think like really starting with your goal and then what you
Mhm.
want to achieve out of it is just this is so key. And like I said, there's many different ways to kind of approach these problems. And there's different benefits. Like I mean, like personally, I've gotten lucky in my life at some time. And luck is part of the journey for a lot of, generally any kind of success, right? You met the right person that connected you to the right thing. Like I had some individual stocks that I'd been investing in the 2010s, and I'd kind of when I quit my job, I had saved up enough just from my salary and savings to kind of take another year off at that point. But then I also kind of got lucky because I had some individual stocks that had been kind of going crazy during COVID. But I also, there's also planning opportunities that are available if you're not working. Like if you're in a low income year, like, oh, I can sell some of these stocks and pay 0% in federal taxes on them. Depending on the state you're in, like if you're in California, you're still going to pay taxes on that. But you know, um, so there's definitely some opportunities there when you're kind of in a low income year as well. So I was able
And
to take advantage of those and learn from that.
that brings me to the point of, like one of the things that we at least I've been brought up that way, and kind of like it's like 401k or like tax, um qualified accounts and like tax deferred, and like that's great. And when I started thinking about it, like one of the things they'd say is like, okay, because you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. It's like, actually, I don't want to be in a lower tax bracket when I retire, and thinking about like, are you investing in other places besides just qualified accounts? Because if you do want to use that money, like which I have, right? Like, and I worked through the emotional part of it because you're taught like never touch that money before 59 and a half, but like you are paying taxes and penalties, you know what I mean? Versus if you were to do something like in a non-qualified, where just in an investable account, right? Like you would just pay long-term capital gains on that, And so there's so many different, I think like what you're saying is so powerful, Andy, of like, what is the goal? Because I think we are just like taught with, okay, this is the way to do it, or, this is, minimize taxes. Like we're so focused almost in a way of like from a scarcity standpoint, right? Like
Yeah.
I have to minimize taxes. Like I've talked to business owners, I'm like, and they're like talking to me about, you know, invoices for the year and things of that sort. And I'm like, just bill it, just do it. Like, we'll worry about paying the taxes, but like almost like shooting themselves in the foot, because been so conditioned of like minimize taxes
Hmm.
versus yes, you want to be wise with paying taxes and how can we use the tax law to minimize our taxes, but not at the expense of our revenue generating, activities and things of that sort. So, would you be open to sharing like just some just general things that you kind of talk to different people about in terms of like what are some things to be mindful of minimizing taxes, and also like if you are wanting to take some time off like you're saying, what are some things that during that time you can kind of take advantage of, of those lower income years, as if you're taking time off or you're just getting started in your business, things of that sort.
Oh, for sure. There, like you say, there's yeah, like it brings up a few different things in my mind. Um, yeah, kind of on the topic about like future tax rates. It's definitely like a kind of a when I talk about like putting money into like Roth accounts where you kind of already paid the taxes, and theoretically you can withdraw that money tax free and penalty free in the future. But it kind of, when we're talking about like future tax rates, like these are things that like no one knows for sure. Like, right,
Mhm.
these are all just guesses. Like, and so much of financial planning is working with like the best guesses based on the information we have. But the circumstances are changing all the time, and I totally I'm with you on the taxes thing. So yeah, I know in financial planning, a phrase you hear a lot among the profession is like letting the tax tail wag the investment dog, or wagging the financial planning dog, because it does become like this albatross that can be hard. So actually, that was kind of one of the things that I felt like I was going to help people with in terms of the focus was there's a lot of people, let's say Silicon Valley, that if they had investments in companies that went booming, they have investments in maybe their own company through RSUs that they didn't then sell. They may
Mhm.
have these kind of concentrated stock positions, but the fear of the tax bill kind of results in a lot of people not doing anything, right? Because they just like hold on to these things. and they kind of just keep increasing in some cases. I mean, in some
Yeah.
cases, the market takes care of it for you and brings it back down. So, you can kind of cut both ways depending on your, and this is where luck. Um, so, but I feel like when you're in a situation like you might have a low income year, it does, looking at from a financial planner perspective, I do think of it as it's an opportunity to kind of maybe invite them to, so the prospect of doing it without the tax impact is kind of a way to approach the discussion that around things that I feel like they should probably already be having, but it can
Hmm.
kind of be an enticement to get them to finally like take the movement that they might have been afraid to if they had. So for instance, one of the big ones being like if you're not really earning any income, you could harvest a fair amount of appreciation in your stocks. So if you have stocks that you've held kind of more than a year and it's what they call long-term capital gains rate,
Hmm.
if you're not making any income, so like I don't have the exact numbers,
Yeah.
but at least at a federal level, so depending on your state, there may be state tax impact. But like if you're like a married couple and you're filing together, you could there's a certain exclusion. I think it's maybe like $32,000 if you're not itemizing or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's another like $80,000 of the cap. So basically, you can like harvest, somewhere around $100,000 a year as a married couple in
Yeah.
the gains, not even just like the total value of the stock, but like how
Yeah.
much it's gone up.
Yep.
So that's a valuable opportunity for people with maybe they have like cryptocurrency or they have individual stocks that kind of blew up. This is probably more applicable a few years ago but I've seen that Bitcoin's back up again. So these kind of things recur, and there's like cycles to these kind of conversations, but they're kind of rooted in these more timeless principles. So yeah, 0% long-term capital gain harvesting is a big one. Another is kind of the conversation around Roth conversions while you're kind
Mm.
of in a low tax bracket. So you have money in a 401k or some company plan, but in a year you're not earning income, you could theoretically convert a lot of this to a Roth account, which then you're kind of already paid the taxes on it, but like while you're in that lower tax bracket. And Roth accounts too, they also have some additional flexibility. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. We talked about the tax timing thing, but with the Roth accounts in particular versus a traditional 401k, they kind of have this interesting property where the actual like contributions to the Roth account that you can kind of withdraw those in 5 years instead
Yep.
of having to necessarily wait till. So it provides some interesting like the
Mhm.
maybe quote unquote ideal situation is really that you're placing your more aggressive high growth assets in the Roth account, so that kind of the amount that you're netting post tax in the long run is the highest. And that's kind of like the textbook theoretical case. But in practice, there definitely is some opportunities. It can almost function like a quasi emergency fund of like, oh, I could, especially if you don't need it for those 5 years. So that is kind of a common strategy in the financial independent community is around like executing these things they call Roth ladders, where you kind of
Mhm.
like basically run these conversions in a way that you kind of have availability to these funds in 5 years tax free. So kind of as you're getting close to that 59, so maybe like you're in your early 50s, you might start having like a strategic plan, kind of using those tools to get there. There's also like another technique for people, if they have incentive stock options. They kind of, and it's a form of equity compensation with kind of some unique properties. Um, and interesting challenges as well. So like when you exercise these incentive stock options, they're not subject to like normal taxation at all if you don't sell them. But you can incur like this thing called alternative minimum tax, which is like this parallel tax system. So it's ISO planning is weird because you really have to run the numbers on these two different systems and then kind of
Mhm.
iterate from there. But if you're in a low income year, there's a certain amount of income that kind of gets excluded from AMT calculation right off the bat. So I think this year it might be like 75,000. Don't quote me on that, but like
Yeah.
theoretically, there's like some amount of space to convert or exercise some of these ISOs without having to incur AMT. There's also if you're on student loans, you could recertify your student loans if you're on an income driven kind of plan, if you have federal loans, you can, in fact, like recertify that right away.
What does that
And
mean?
Yeah, so you can kind of get them to like reassess your income and give you like a
Okay.
new rate of payment. So if
Okay.
you're not earning any money, your payment, you know, could
Could
be
go
zero or very close to
drastically.
low, and
Okay.
drastically reduce that kind of monthly expense that you'd have to incur. And um, I should have double checked, but I'm pretty sure for most of those, I think you have to recertify like the next year, but
Okay.
I forget the exact specifics on it. But there's basically a period of time where you can kind of get I think when I forget exactly if you have to report when you get a new job, so don't quote. But basically,
But it's just another
there's some
idea that
ability to
like,
kind of create longer stretches of time where you're not having to
yeah.
pay these. And depending on the state you're in, like healthcare is a big thing, and that's one of the big things I navigate with people thinking about career breaks is kind of, how do I so much of the American medical system, right, is kind of built. It's not a I don't love it,
It's not a
but it's
healthcare system. I'll say it. It's not a well-being system.
we gotta make the insurance companies profit somehow, Aaron.
Man, between that and the pharmaceutical companies, I'm just like,
Yep.
wow.
But depending on your state, you may be able to qualify for Medicaid. Certain states have different restrictions around whether you could own assets or how they assess your income, blah blah blah. But certain states, Medicaid can be kind of a great way to kind of get some health coverage and have it all be covered. So, anyway, those are kind of a few of the kind of topics and tactics for those kind of low income years.
And I want to bring up like how important it is to, I think some of us that work with CPAs where we think of it like, okay, it's my, like, I'd be curious to know for you too, your clients of like, oh, it's time for taxes versus like actual tax planning. Like I'm thinking of doing this, or these are my kind of ideas over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, like really forward thinking planning for like, how do we optimize this, working with you and the CPA to figure out like, what is kind of, and there's when I say strategy, like obviously ultimately coming back to yourself and like what feels good, you're knowing that kind of stuff. But like give me some ideas, like what you were just saying about the student loans, like no idea, had no idea about that. Right. And so I think there's a lot of things that are out there for people that either we're not talking about it, we're not sharing it, we don't, and as the consumer, like we don't know about it. So we don't even know the questions to ask to even know that this is a possibility.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely the tax planning is. So that's kind of one of the reasons I focus on it in the marketing is it's just it is such a pain point that people feel like a lot of
Yeah.
times people when you say you're a financial planner, they may not really like know what that even is or what that
Mm,
fully means. Like they may know like it's associated with money somehow. Maybe they think, oh, it's around investments, um, but really it's, I mean, at least the way that I approach it for me is like it's really around like what kind of life do you want to live, and
mm.
then kind of like how can we work to make that possible through the system that we have and kind of the resources that you have. So yeah, the tax planning piece I feel is very important because everyone feels the pain of taxes in their life. So it's kind of a thing that's like a more known and understood thing. Um, but I think, yeah, most people, they think of it as like, you give your documents to the CPA and
Yep.
it's like, okay,
Yep.
they do my
It's just a thing you
taxes,
do.
right?
Yep.
But it's like, no, you can like strategize around how you want to potentially like realize income, like how you want to, maybe you want to, especially if you're like a bit like for business owners and solopreneurs, you can have a self-employed 401k and put a
Mhm.
lot more money into those than you could on the kind of the consumer end 401k at a company. I think the I think this year it's something like $70,000 or somewhere in that ballpark that you can. So if you're a business owner, let's say you're like, at a 35% tax bracket, like that's a pretty significant tax savings if you're deferring. I mean, whether that's long term optimal, that's kind of another question.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely advantages to also, and there's honestly benefit to, I think, to a certain degree from a tactical perspective. Having some funds in each of these types of accounts gives you different leverage, right? Like
Yep.
there's some cases where you may need to realize more income, in which case having money in a 401k could be a way that actually generates some of that income versus like if you have all your money in Roth accounts, like that's awesome, that's great, but like you basically are wasted some of it because you could have realized some income and not paid any taxes on it.
Yeah.
So a lot of these will, vary depending on your specific situation. But I think so much of it tends to be like iterative, kind of, planning out kind of a course of, maybe like looking ahead to the next couple of years and tactically like what's coming up, how can we strategize around it, and then as those events occur and life happens, like the reality is like this. I feel modern life is very dynamic. Like, you know, you look back like 3 year, like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, at least for me, like my life, I feel was very different at each of those
Oh,
points,
yes.
and I feel like trying to project out 2, 3, 5 years, like, yeah, it's not a bad idea to have like a direction and like a
Yeah.
course, but like you also have to be flexible with that and realize that things change, right? That's just the
Yeah.
nature of reality.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I was sitting down with our daughter. She's going to turn 12. And at the time when she was born, we were working with our financial planner and we lived in Texas at the time. And so I was telling Grayson, like, okay, well, we did this. It's called the Texas Tuition Promise Fund, which basically in Texas, it was like you put a lump sum of money in, right? And I'm like, okay, well, how does that, first of all, like, Erin back then, she was doing the best that she could, right? Like she wanted to make sure her child, but like now my kid is like, I don't even know if I'm going to go to school, mom. And like, am I even going to go to school in Texas? Which probably not, right? Like, and so it's just like what you're saying, like I think that what we're trying to feel when we're trying to plan so far ahead is safety and security and certainty, right? And so many of us have been taught that by doing something, that's going to bring that feeling versus knowing and becoming and generating those feelings within us. Because, now I look back and I'm like, okay, I mean, we can take the money out, it's our money, but it's just like, I literally was my baby was a newborn, right? And we were planning when she was going to be 18 and like what are the units in college and all of this kind of stuff. And now it's like that cannot like it could probably be so 180 and farthest from the what might happen, right? And so really just like you're saying, Andy, of having the knowledge and having also that flexibility, right? Like, okay, let's try this and let's do this for a year or two and then let's reevaluate. I think so many of us think, okay, that is the plan. We're going down this route for 18, 20 years, versus like you said, like my life, your life is so vastly different than it was several years ago. Like allowing for that flexibility and for that freedom. I want to go back real quick just because I'm curious. So the self-employed 401k, and I know I'm not holding you to the numbers, but I'm trying to remember with the SEP IRA and the
Mhm.
self-employed 401k, is there a difference tax wise, or is it just a dollar amount? But the SEP is are your employees able to do that as well? I'm trying to like pull back my memory. I'm like, I cannot
Yeah, I think
remember.
I think the big thing with the SEP versus the solo is it's a little less flexible if you want to have. I think the big thing with the SEP is it's only employer contributions,
Okay.
so
Yes.
employees can't contribute. So the solo 140K has a little more flexibility because you can kind of contribute. Like if you're like a solopreneur, you can kind of contribute as the employee and as the employer. So
Okay.
SEPs though, the big thing is like if you're offering them whatever contribution that you're offering yourself, you kind of also have to offer it in kind to. So maybe you don't want to offer to employees the same structure that you want to set up for your own, and that
Yeah.
versus like a 401k is a little more
They put in.
flexible. From you could have employer contributions, but you could
Yep.
also kind of have that employee flexibility where they can put in their own money, you can match them or whatever else maybe.
Yeah. That it
They're
brings
a
back
little
the days
simpler
when
to create though. Someone 401ks, there's a little bit more
I was going to
like
say you
when
got
you
some
get up to a
TPA
certain amount of
stuff.
assets, there's an extra layer of compliance where you have to file
Yeah.
like a form
Yeah.
with the IRS. I mean
Yeah.
there are companies that will kind of do that stuff for you, and that obviously that's one of the things I do as well. But like
Yeah.
um it's not. But yeah, there's pros and cons. There's potentially a little more flexibility to in the types of ways that you want to set it up.
Yeah.
Um, I want to say a bunch of stuff, but then I'm like not sure if this is correct because I haven't been in this space for the steps for a while. I remember a year ago when I was studying for the CFP exam, I had all this stuff down. But then when you go into the field and you're actually doing the work, right? It's much more like as it comes up. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
I know the lay of the land. Where do I need to look? Where,
Yeah.
but you're not necessarily like in any given moment. Like you don't need to know everything
No, it's
offhand. But it's
it's that was one of the things that I really had to learn because I used to have such anxiety with my clients because I put so much pressure on myself to know. And I'm like, wait a second. When I call my CPA, they tell me 9 times out of 10, I don't know. Let me go look it up. Why am I expecting myself to know every single thing for every client? And, like what you're saying with when you said that with the SEP, it's definitely, I think it's an employer funded side versus the 401k, right? Like you get to, and you can do different things of, profit sharing and matching and all kinds of stuff. And so I think like what you're saying, um,
I could be
is
wrong here. My thought was like I feel like maybe they don't support Roth accounts. I may be incorrect on that. I need to circle back and double check on that.
yeah. With SEP IRAs, you mean? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's just traditional IRA. And hey, to all of you listening and watching, go do your own research. We're just giving you some ideas and some thought processes to take and run with it and little nuggets to think about differently. But yeah, I think that and like anything, right? It's like this is the sentiment I keep hearing from people is like, I don't know what I don't know, like I there was a lot of things that I either brought to my family's construction business or I learned on the job while we were, like you're saying, like with the 401k and like all of the TPA, which is third party administration, and just like the, IRS regulations and like that stuff you learn in real time. Like some of that can be sped up, through either working with someone that knows that stuff. And sometimes it's just like, now we're in this position. Now I need to figure it out, So, would you love to share about like advice only financial planners, like fee based, or would you term advice only and fee based in the same category versus kind of what would you how would you kind of categorize other financial planners that kind of like generate income over your total assets and things of that sort?
Yeah, there's all kinds of different labels, and some of them, maybe more or less confusing the consumer. Like to a certain, I feel like advisors probably care about these labels more than consumer. Although I definitely came into it. My perspective was, I always felt like an advisor collecting what they call the assets under management (AUM).
Yep.
I always was kind of like viewed it as like, shoot, they're just trying to like collect rent was the words and kind of the phrase that I had used to describe that on my I've I've since like realized like I feel like every model has got its pros and cons.
Yeah.
So maybe like I'll start with kind of like the basics like uh, even when you get licensed as a financial advisor. So like it kind of for me my path started when I kind of had a friend. He approached me for help with investing. He'd had a successful business and was kind of looking for help on the investment side. And that kind of really kicked off in me. I was not looking to make a career change at that point. I was kind of had just started my own career break, and I was actually kind of looking at maybe doing like freelancing. I had been doing more web programming the last couple of years, and was like I could maybe freelance around there. I started taking a machine learning course. I was like, I kind of want to learn a little bit about that. But I had this friend approach me for investment help, and it just, I was like, oh, what is even required to do this like legally as like an independent,
Yeah.
person? So I learned that the licensing is kind of not. It's interesting. There's a few different paths to licensing that a financial advisor, quote unquote, can mean many different things.
Mm,
It can mean like at one level, people that are licensed to sell insurance products oftentimes
mm,
will like I'm a financial advisor, but like fundamentally they're there to sell insurance products, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a licensing that's specific to that. There's also like licensing that's specific to selling investment products. Like you make money selling commissioned mutual funds or commissioned like annuities or different kinds of products. Actually, I think annuities would fall under the insurance
Well, let me
regulation.
yeah, no, 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 I think it is under the series. And I just want to say that
Okay.
there are different licenses for investments, right? Like, because I knew people that took
Mhm.
like, and I know we're going down a rabbit hole, but I think it's important to know, right? Like, there are people that you can take like a series 6, right? But I had to take the series 7, which was a much more in detailed. And so there are differences of like what you can sell based on the licenses and the tests that you take. So, and I don't want to, there's no good or bad, right? It's just like knowledge and knowing like what does your advisor hold and like what can they sell. Oh, and I want to talk about captive and non-captive, but go ahead and keep talking about the licenses and things of that sort.
Sure. Yeah. So then, kind of on the other, so if you want to sell advice, but you don't have any like commission products to sell, you don't get any commissions off of investment products or insurance products. There's the Series 65. So that's kind of what most people that are like I'm a fiduciary financial advisor. Usually, it's like they hold like the Series 65 is kind of like the basic license to hold, which is really not that high of a bar. Like, it didn't take me a lot of studying to pass that test, to be honest. If I'm like, it was not, I mean, definitely as soon as I passed the test, I'm like, I realized, yeah, I really don't know enough to do this and charge people money. Like, no way. So like that was just the beginning of my journey. And then kind of from there, I took the certified financial planner coursework and I started doing like externships and masterminds, and I was, really like learning from like people that had been doing it, people that are, in the invested like the top 100 financial advisor lists, and a lot of those kind of folk I started hanging out with, learning from. But anyway, so yeah, so fee only versus it was kind of and fee based are kind of based off the idea that so fee based advisors um, will be able to potentially charge like a fee that's directly for kind of the advice,
Okay.
and they may also have like commission products, as opposed to someone if they're only making money through these other products, then they couldn't like fee based kind of means that you can kind of charge a base fee at the core, and there may be ancillary services that commissions are earned on after. So fee only was kind of is this idea of like, hey, we're not incentivized by our commissions. Like our advice is
Recommendations.
unbiased. It's just based off what's in your interest, right?
Yep.
Um, and that I think that was really gained it kind of came into play a lot in the 90s and kind of has grown a lot over the last 20, 30 years. At least that's my perspective as an outsider
Yeah.
from what I hear. And then there's been a lot of variations and evolutions of that now, where I know there's folks that are like, we're a flat fee planner where we only charge like a flat fee, and that may include investment management or not. So when I launched my firm, I started as what they call advice only, which is like we don't even offer investment management in case for people that are afraid that the fact that you could manage investments creates a conflict of interest. So I have kind of moved away from that to where I now am offering like investment management is an optional thing for me. Like I don't need to manage your investments, right? I kind of charge the
Yeah.
same fee regardless if people want
Yeah.
to do it themselves or if I'm going to manage the investments for them. I just charge a flat fee for that. But it is kind of interesting to me. Just yeah, all these new models evolve to serve new segments because like I came in, with that whole thing of like I would have sought out an advisor myself in the case of where I really felt that I didn't know what I didn't know. Because like I kind of knew
Mhm.
that theoretically, but like I didn't feel it was enough of a pain point for me to have ever searched out an advisor. In my head, I always thought of it as if I find out my company is going to IPO, that's when I probably want to reach out to someone because I knew about alternative minimum tax. I knew like about these things, but then like actually putting together calculating that tax, like strategizing around it and the impact it has, like that's kind of where I felt like, okay, I would definitely need to reach out to someone in this case. So I kind of started with that model, but it's somewhat evolved because I realized, or one of the things, at least for me, um, I feel like like the end, like there are people that do care about it, but like no one's like coming to your business just because you have a different business model, right? You could be like, this is me, I have this unique model, but like, people fundamentally care about, can you help me with my problem? Not
Yeah.
like, are you running like the most pure business like, and it's easy to get fixated on like these ideas of like purity because like I grew up with a strong kind of a like traditional faith-based upbringing where I think a lot of that's still stuck of like this idea of like
Mm.
this purity of what I'm offering. But like the
Mm.
consumer, it doesn't necessarily. I mean, there are some people for whom they seek out those kind of planners, and I'm glad there are more different types of planners out there, so people can find the kind that maybe fits with what they're looking for. Um, but also, as you say, like I've seen sometimes you go into it thinking you want a thing, and then you. So a lot of people come to financial advisors. They come to us like for a thing or two,
Yeah.
but then they kind of don't realize in the process like all the other stuff that we're
It's like weaving
actually
down the
going to
little
look
rabbit hole, right? Like,
at.
yeah, I
Yes,
mean, and going back to like, you
absolutely.
don't know what you don't know. And then you talk to someone who does this all day, every day, and then you get more clarity and you're like, oh, but then this and this, and then this stuff starts to come out of the woodwork, which is perfect, right? And I think to your point of, you know, the purity part, it's like, I would much rather work with someone who is genuinely loves what they're doing and like the relationship is there. Like I have over the I had a planner for a long time, but it became very transactional based. It was like, okay, here's my, annual or quarter like call to you versus like, this doesn't really feel fun. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that is something really important. Like, I want to go work with people like that want to have some fun and like, oh, I'm going to go meet, like, because I think we already have so much heavy feelings around money already, it's like going to talk to your CPA or your, attorney or your financial planner. It's like, let's have some fun when we go do it. Like that to me is, for me, that's my belief, right? Like that weighs more heavily for me than like someone that knows all of the things and
Mhm.
is like, ugh, I got to go see so and so because it's time to go do that, you know?
Absolutely. I definitely like that. I feel like that's definitely what proved to be the case, at least kind of working with my first few clients. I feel that most people they chose to work with me because like maybe I was also had been in tech or I had
Yeah.
been a programmer and kind of things that they could resonate to in a way that like a traditional financial advisor wouldn't necessarily have that same background. And even as is now, like actually, I just literally yesterday I was sending paperwork to a new client who they kind of were already working with an advisor, but they're like, I don't feel like my advisor gets me. Like they kind of felt they didn't really feel very understood, or, and kind of when I was like digging into like their situation, I was really surprised at the things their advisor hadn't been talking about with them. Like, really, you don't talk about like, your tax like as someone who's like doing freelancing, like they're not like preparing you for your tax bill like throughout the year. Like they're not working. Like to me, I'm like that's like table stakes, right? This is just like basic, the stuff that if you're serving business owners, that it's a huge
Yeah.
pain point. It's a huge part of
Yeah.
the value that you can help people with.
Yeah.
Um, so my very first client too, like he was like, I like that you're not, driving the fancy cars. And he's like, hey, I like the financial advisor who lives out of a van and is traveling around and like living his best life. Like I found a lot of people resonate with that. And ironically, a lot of CPAs and accountants, I feel like a lot of, I don't know if it's like the stereotype of like this life that's interesting and exotic versus the stereotype of maybe a
I
typical
think you're
accounting
living
life.
the
But
life they want. I
yeah,
think that's what's
I
happening.
feel I look at a lot of times I look around at people that they like to talk about how successful they are and all this stuff. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm living a much happier life.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to say that like in an egoistic, but I it's you can have all these numbers, you can check all the things on the box, like you can be very successful. Like I know in Silicon Valley, I've seen people with large exits and like tens of millions of dollars that are not that happy,
Miserable.
frankly.
Yeah.
You know,
I think this is really important to drive home. And this is like at the core of my message, right? Of like, it's really how we feel. Like we have been so conditioned in society to say, like, oh, someone's successful or I'm successful. And it is a dollar amount in your bank account or what your revenue or profit is in your business. And you're miserable. And there is no amount of money that is ever going to bring you that feeling. And so, like, what Andy is saying without saying it is like, how do you actually want to define your success, right? Like success for me is like a life well lived, right? Like having fun along the way as I create more and give back. And, it's just like all areas of your life feel like fulfilled. And that's not to say I don't have bad days and, all of that, right? But it's just like on a baseline daily basis, like, do I love waking up in the morning? Do I love putting my head on my pillow at the end of the night and being like, that was so fun today, right? And I think that for a lot of us, I know I was in this boat, that isn't necessarily the case, and so really defining for yourself, like, what is success look like for you? What is, like, so many people, it's like, oh, I have a successful business, but your marriage is shit. It's like, is that really success? Is that success that your children don't know who you are because you've spent all of your time building your business, which is great. I understand that. And also, like, where is that what you want to what kind of life do you want to live? And so, yeah, I think that I'm putting my beliefs on the CPAs and the accountants, but I really or the financial advisors, but I really think like it's one thing, it's almost like, when you go and you take a business course from a professor versus taking a business course from an entrepreneur that just happens to teach the business course, it's like you are a living, breathing thing that is practicing what you preach, right? Like that's why we save, that's why we invest, that's why we do all of the things we do, is like to have the life that we want. I do want to go back real quick because I think this is important because this applies to insurance agents too, and this is something that I learned through financial planning. But like there is captive and non-captive, and I don't think a lot of people know about like what does that mean from an insurance standpoint, or like a funds, investment funds, things of that sort. If you want to share with people about that.
Sure. You probably know a lot more about this than I do. So I'll just share like what I think I know, which may not actually be the most accurate because I haven't been in this space a whole lot. But at least as far as I understand it, the idea is that the captive agents, they're kind of there to only sell one family of product under a certain, like basically like they can only sell the products that the people that are supporting them to sell want them to sell,
Yep.
versus maybe someone who has more latitude to employ like a broad. They're not beholden to any particular like family of products.
Yeah.
If is
Yeah.
that is that
That's
accurate?
perfect. Yeah. I think that that's really like, I mean, it's just if you go to your local agent, sometimes they might only be able to sell a couple of insurance product, like, yeah, insurance. Like, when I say insurance products, what I mean is companies, brands of insurance, right? Or same thing like with, you're talking about index funds, so that's not a captive thing, right? But like, just if you are choosing different types of funds, just being aware of like, if they're not suggesting index funds and they are suggesting other brands of mutual funds or things of that sort, is it coming from a place of like, these are all of your options, or is it coming from these are your options? So just being aware of what that is, and yeah, if you here we go back to like it's just knowledge, right? Like a lot of people think like, oh, this is what my advisor, this is what my insurance agent recommended, but it's like, do you know that there's lots of other things that you can to do or invest in?
Absolutely. So my undergrad, before I studied computer science, before I kind of got into the personal finance side, was my undergrad was economics. And
Mm,
I feel of all the things I learned in economics, the only yeah, there's a lot of macros, a lot of like philosophy and psychology actually mixed in with it, because it's like how do you understand human behavior at scale. But one of the things that really struck with me is just the extent to which incentives have the potential to shape outcomes. And
yeah.
and that doesn't mean that if someone has commission products, because like there's the case where sometimes it's easier for people to get, if they have their advisor that can write that life insurance policy for them that they need.
Yeah.
There's definitely an argument to be made that that can be a better end service to the client at times. So it's
Yeah.
but it's kind of just important to know what the incentives are, so that
Yeah.
you can kind of then make the decision that's the most appropriate for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything else that you want to add or share?
Well, when you mentioned about defining success, it's interesting
Mm,
because I had thought about that recently. Like, I was thinking about, well, what would it like? What does my life look like when I say that? If I'm gonna like, how do I define success for myself? And I kind of
yeah.
made it in like a bullet form. I was like, hey, can I spend winter somewhere warm?
Mm.
I For me, it's like, can I not feel rushed in the morning? I like
Oh,
having 2 or 3 hours before working, because I think modern life is very stimulated and very. So I think having some time in the morning is really important to me, which is hard to accommodate in a 9 to 5 without getting up at
hmm.
like 5 a.m., which is
Yep.
also not a thing that I love the idea of, frankly. Um, you know, when my income exceeds my expenses, I don't necessarily need to. I don't have like a gigantic number I need to achieve, but like, am I cash flow positive here? Can I take frequent vacations? Like, for example, like maybe like every quarter. Am
Yeah.
I working on projects that excite me and allow me to do good work? Do I have happy people in my life?
Mm.
Can I dress as I please? Can I
Mm.
say no to new business? Can I host like a
Oh,
social gathering every month? And like, can I give to people without really any kind of second thought to it?
yep.
And those are kind of the criteria for me. But getting clear on what that is for you, and it's a journey and it evolves over time, no doubt. But getting more clear on those things is, it's the numbers. It kind of focusing on the numbers first, and then having that, it doesn't like lead to success. But
Yeah.
like, if really focusing on what is you want out of life,
Yeah.
then once you kind of have that vision, it's easier to kind of have the supporting resources work to achieve that.
Yeah. It's like creating, it's the back asswards way we've been taught, right? It's like it's actually creating what you want, like knowing what you want and then creating it from that space. And I will say, like, Erin 4 years ago, when you asked her, like, what do you want? I knew what I didn't want, right? That's what I knew. And
Yep.
for some of us, that's actually where we have to it might,
Hmm.
where we start, because we have that polarity, we have that contrast. Exactly what you're saying. I knew I was tired of working all of the time. I knew that, like you're saying, getting up and that feeling of rushing. It's funny you say that, because I was sitting just watching the birds and the squirrels this morning, and I'm just like, gosh, how far have I come, to where like no phone calls, no nothing. Like it's 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm just like hanging with my kid on the couch and we're watching the squirrels, like it seems so like also too, Aaron probably 4 years ago would have been like like that, but like that is everything because how to like that feeling that I feel is not it's of calm and peace, right? Versus pressure and rush. And I think so many of us have just accepted, I think accepted and tolerated, that might be a good word for like rushing and like you don't have to live your life like that. Like really getting clear and a little bit at a time, right? Like maybe it is where you get to sleep in, a little bit more or you do take a little bit of a slower route to work or whatever it is for you that's just a little bit outside your comfort zone for you because I think it does feel a little uncomfortable when we're changing from our old way like you said pain points like from our old way of being it does feel uncomfortable, right? Like if you're used to having chaos and stress all of the time your body is going to send you signals when you're not in stress and chaos, right? It's going to want you to return back because that's what it's known and that's what it's used to versus what do I want my life to look like? How do I actually like starting with opposite of money? How do I want to feel, on a day in and day out basis? Yeah, I think that's brilliant because that's really what we're going for, and then the money just happens as a byproduct versus the money being the pillar and then trying to make everything else go around it.
I think too, sometimes we get in these cycles where, like you say, like we get to the point where we know that what we don't want. We realize it
Yep.
in a negative way, like we don't want X. I almost think, and it's sometimes like it's even hard to know what the why is until like you've given yourself space to even like.
Oh,
So part of what I feel like I really want to do is to normalize the conversations we have around the idea of career breaks because like I feel like I used to market myself as like the tech sabbatical planner, and that was kind of the language I used. And I still will talk about sabbaticals. I'm not anti-sabbatical here. That's definitely not my intent. But I almost feel like that we're so afraid of saying the word break that we have to wrap it up in language because we can't even allow ourselves to consider that like sometimes you just need a break. Like
yeah.
human real talk here. Like I knew for me, like I knew I wanted to do some traveling. Like so I knew there was some things. I knew I didn't want to just stay in the Bay Area. Although, ironically, I may end up moving there next month. But that's kind of a whole different segue there. But it'll be different this time. But but sometimes you don't even know, like until you
Yeah.
have that space. Like I never envisioned I was gonna switch to financial planning and like literally these things just unfolded once I gave myself the space. New opportunities
Yes.
emerged, and
Yeah.
I even find that still ongoing, right? I launched my firm last year, and you start different things just by putting yourself out there, by having the space for it. Things emerge that you consciously didn't necessarily plan. Like I've been getting potential offers around like fintech consulting because like I can help people navigate. I could make code, I could write code and like do software engineering, but like yeah, but I'm also like kind of like a personal finance expert as well. Like I can kind of, and I feel those skill sets are usually not in the same person. So
Hmm.
I've been finding myself finding at the interesting crossroads there, potentially attracting those opportunities as well. And that was not, a thing you planned. Like my interests and everything totally changed too for my own career break. I was not a big nature outdoorsy person at all,
Mm.
but like my original travel plans is like, I was going to go to cities and go to like concerts and events and check out the next city that I wanted to live in. But like with the course of kind of doing like a lot of nomadic van life and doing a lot of like wild camping all in these like giant open spaces, especially in like kind of between the Sierras and the Rockies, I really like fell in love with like these wide open spaces and nature and astronomy. Like now do like astrophotography and like all these hobbies that I didn't even like do before or consider, like they weren't part of how I viewed myself. And sometimes you don't, like, even it's hard to, we don't always give ourselves space to be who we are because like modern society imposes these demands on us. But like I think sometimes we just need a break to even know what the next step is. And it's scary though because you take a break and you don't always know what the plan is. And right, maybe you build a buffer. Maybe you have like a fund that's like, okay, this is my replacement income money. Maybe you build like an account that's like a transition fund into the world, right?
Mhm.
Like some buffer. Maybe you do all these things. but even then, like, there is, it's definitely like an element of when you take a leap like that, there is an element of like you don't always know how it's going to turn out. Um, but there's sometimes where it's like we can get ourselves so attached to comfort that
Yes.
it's almost like more uncomfortable staying in these comfortable positions and leading us down a direction that's not like being true to ourselves, even if we don't consciously know it. Like we may not be consciously aware. There might be like a part of us that's yearning, to have experiences that we don't even know that we're going to have yet. Like so many things that I have so many stories the last few years. I didn't even really talk about travel or adventure too much or any of that
We might
because
have a part 2 for that. Yeah.
so many stories that just
Yeah.
it's, and like none of that was stuff I predicted, anticipated, planned. And sometimes you just need to give yourself space to feel those things and
Oh,
experience them.
I love that you said that because that is such a huge thing. Like we don't allow ourselves time, right? And we're so scared because we're so. But I don't know if I had major deja vu for a hot second when you said, we're addicted to the comfort. Because I was was I telling you that or someone else that I was talking about? Like almost the money that we make, we get into this comfort of like we don't want to leave that little little comfort lifestyle that we have. And I don't know anybody that has left the comfort and has wished they would go back to how it was, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't look anything like what they thought it would and everything like what they wanted to feel. And, just that, like you said, that giving yourself that space, same thing like with you with travel. Like I thought I wanted travel to look a certain way. And then the more that I traveled, I'm like, I don't want to be anywhere near. I mean, I love all the humans and I don't want to be in a city. Like I want to be all
Mhm.
about the animals and the nature and like the vastness, like very intentional with how we travel now. And so that couldn't have happened if I one never gave myself the opportunity to take time off and two actually went and did some things and then realized that's not really what I'm looking for and then being able to be flexible to change like how do we want to travel and but the space part is huge. Like we don't even give like even you think about meetings, how many of us jam pack every single second of our day. Like here's, what Andy and I are talking about. The goal ultimately, right? If you want, is to take some time off from work. But like you can start small right now of like looking at your calendar to see like, do I even have time to like go sit out in the sun and enjoy my iced
Mhm.
tea for 20 minutes between one meeting and the next? Like, am I even allowing myself a bathroom break? Like, I can't tell you how many people I talk to. They're like, yeah, I don't go in the bathroom. I'm just like, our sweet bodies, like what we're doing of just this constant, we're under this stress pressure cooker versus, like you say, and being bored, right? Like we don't value being bored,
Mhm.
right? We are in a society where, I mean, how many times you go out to eat and people are eating together and they're scrolling on whatever platform they're on, right? Versus it's okay to look out the window and just watch whatever happens, because and I think that goes back to like, do we like being with ourselves, right? Like do we like our own company? Do we enjoy who we are? And are we trying to, do all of the things, mask all of the stuff because, who we are, we're not really enjoying or being feel content with who we are and where we are right now in life.
Oh, I love that. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, where can people find you? And if they want to reach out to you, connect with you, all of the things.
Sure. So I kind of maintain a Linktree kind of site at andymoran.io, ANDYMORAN.io. And that'll kind of
Okay.
have links to my firm and kind of be posting kind of things here and there, like some promos and freebies. Kind of got some things in the work for this year. So I'm excited for it.
Okay. Where do you put all of the things that you like travel, like all your pictures and things of that sort? Like, where does that go?
Ooh. Oh man. Honestly, I feel like I don't post enough. It's mostly on
Mm,
my Instagram stories. So
okay.
it's not super branded. Like it's mostly just my personal Instagram, but
Yeah.
like feel free if people are interested, they can stalk me there. And
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of. I feel like I do more stuff in the story form. It's a little more ephemeral. It's kind of fun. So you
Yeah.
can't always, that's kind of where I am the most active at posting travel stuff. I mean, every
Yeah.
so often I'll do a LinkedIn or like recently I did a blog about like how much it cost me to spend like a month in Cancun. currently I'm doing this interview from Puerto Vallarta right now for another month.
I'm
Practicing
like,
what I
Andy
preach
was
here.
surfing yesterday. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, definitely the highs and the lows, but yeah, no, it's been a fun ride, and I am
Yeah.
looking forward to continuing surfing the wave.
Ah, perfect. Okay. Thank you, Andy, for all your time and your knowledge. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, Aaron.